Thanks everybody for joining us again. I'm handing the reins over to Marnie this evening, who's going to work with Marion through the webinar. So have a great show and talk to you again soon. Over to you, Marnie.
Hi everyone, so welcome to our 10th webinar. This one's on pain management. Say hi to Marion. How are you?
I'm good. In lockdown land, ignore the hair. I've got severe case of lockdown hair.
Don't we all? Don't we all? We can go to the hairdressers.
Well, apparently it also weighs a lot, lockdown hair. So if you've put weight on, it's probably a lockdown hair that's causing the problem.
Don't say that, especially not to my dietitian.
Well, maybe she could double up as a hairdresser.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay, we're going to talk about pain tonight. What we're going to do is talk about pain for about 45 minutes, depending on questions. I'll keep stopping Marnie and we'll take questions. Thank you to Marnie, who's taken over from Andy, who's been feeling a bit naff. And then I've been asked to talk a little bit about hips and spines. Interestingly, hips are a big place that we get pain anyway, and spines are also a place or a source of pain. So the two go together with pain. But I want to start with pain because although spinal muscular atrophy itself is not a condition that is associated with underlying pain, there are pains caused by problems associated with it. To start with, there are two main types of pain. There is the psychogenic pain, perceived pain, chronic pain, something that feels painful but has no real root cause apart from the fact it feels painful. And the second one is the one we know better, which is mechanical pain. Both pains hurt. Psychogenic pain, perceived pain, chronic pain hurt the person who has them, whether they can have a cause or not. But it's not something we're going to go into because these need a totally different management system than physiotherapy. These are very often done in pain teams because they tend to take over your life. And there are a lot of issues that are individual and not specific. Now, mechanical pain, as it says, is caused by a problem, a physical problem, be it the nerves, an injury, or something. Interestingly, children cannot describe pain until around 7 to 9 years old. And when we're talking about describing pain, we categorize pain by how it feels. So you have burning pains, shooting pains, stabbing pains, you can have pins and needles, you can have that deep pain of muscle pain, you can have cramp, not common as a problem as it is in some of the other muscular dystrophies, but even fatigue can be painful. So those are the main types of pain, but a child just knows it hurts. One of the first things they understand is cramp and pins and needles, because they're quite easy to describe. Cramp is when things go tight and they don't last forever. Pins and needles, you get that feeling of what pins and needles are. But otherwise, those other pains, shooting, burning, those pains are much harder for a child to understand, but can have different origins. So sometimes it's helpful to know what sort of pain. And the other thing about pain, obviously, is the intensity of the pain, how much pain there is. So intensity is one aspect, and how long it lasts is another aspect. If you have a very sharp pain, but it only lasts for a second, that may be less troublesome than a much lower level of pain, but it's there 24 hours a day. And these are the things we need to consider. How pain interferes with our life, how pain prevents you from functioning, but also how pain has a cycle and a way of making things worse physically. So once you have a pain, a chronic mechanical pain, it can increase the difficulties considerably. So we need to manage pain. And there's one other thing we need to consider when we're talking about pain, and that is no feeling, numbness. And while that might not sound like it's related to pain, it is a nerve problem. If you have numbness, your nerve is not sending any messages at all. You are not feeling going up as well as coming down. Now, we know in spinal muscular atrophy, it is the motor neurons that affect the strength of the muscle. Those are not the same as pain nerve endings, which go upwards and travel from the source, be it the skin, be it the nerves, and go through the nerves, sensory nerves, up the body into the brain to perceive pain, which may make a motor reaction and may not. So numbness is an issue whereby you're not feeling something, and that is bad too, because when you're numb, there is something wrong and you can have damage that you may not realize. So numb is not a positive sensation either. Now, when it comes to intensity of pain, most of you, adults and children, will have seen something called a pain scale. And that's the smiley faces. And I think I have somewhere got a picture of the smiley faces. But you know, smiley faces go from a happy smiley face to a sad face. And pain scales normally range in severity from 1 to 10, where 10 is the most severe pain. Unfortunately, while 10 is excruciating, it is also incredibly rare. And the thought is that a vast minority of people have ever suffered that sort of excruciating pain. So the pain scales, and particularly the smiley faces, do not always represent the level of pain, particularly in children, because the faces look sad, and sad and pain don't always go together. So one of the issues we were saying was localizing pain, and children can't always tell you, is it deep pain, is it in the joint, is it in the muscle? They just know vaguely where it is, and sometimes they can't even tell you where in the leg it is. It's just in their leg. Now, the other thing that is a problem with the smiley faces and the pain scales, you show them to children, there's 6 faces and 10 categories, so that doesn't work very well either. So what we need to try and establish is what makes the pain worse, what hopefully makes the pain better, and somehow as a physiotherapist work from those bases. The pain cycle and why pain is a problem is that when something hurts, you don't want to move it. So even if the pain is not caused by movement, when you keep still, it can make it more difficult to start moving again. The other thing about pain in something like SMA is pain makes you want to curl up and squeeze into yourself. And you know that if you've got tummy ache, you don't want to spread out and sprawl out. You don't want to stretch. You want to come into yourself. And if you've got chronic pain, ultimately, if you've got contractures, it can make the contractures worse. We need to manage pain, and we need to manage it well. So what causes pain? And this is for children and adults with SMA, parents, carers, spouses, everybody. So there are different causes of pain, as we know. But for those who have SMA, immobility can cause pain. Now, we're not talking pressure sores. Pressure sores are surprisingly rare, although you would think sitting for ages you may get them. Pressure sores usually come from an external force, like splints, occasionally from your wheelchair, but more often than not, pressure sores come from splints. Immobility, keeping still for too long. Muscle pain, which isn't usually a problem, but it will be if you damage muscle. So if you strain a muscle, And what is one of the major causes of sprained muscle, unfortunately, is bad physiotherapy. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a physiotherapist, but overstretching. You won't normally get muscle pain from exercise. So sorry, it's not an excuse not to exercise. You will get fatigue, and if fatigue causes pain, then you've over-exercised. Joint stiffness and contractures is a big one. So anything that causes the joints to get stiff can cause pain. Spine and spinal deformity can obviously cause pain. If you have a very twisted spine, if you're very stuck to one side, we have some people out there who do have severe scoliosis that is not well managed. And if you've got your ribs virtually squashed on your pelvis, or if you're very rotated, you can get pain. Now, another cause of pain are obviously fractures from falls and any broken bone, any injury, but fractures very often are caused by, in the vast majority of people with SMA, are caused by falls in a wheelchair. So the wheelchair tips or falls from a wheelchair. And the number of parents that we have to say, please fasten seatbelts. Oh, they're fine indoors. No, they're not necessarily fine indoors. We have had children slide out of their wheelchairs. We have had children who are going too fast and clip something. We have got several young people out there who've had multiple fractures from not using seatbelts. It sounds sensible. A lot of people don't do it. And ultimately, fractures cause a lot of problems. Overstretching muscle, but overstretching spines. Now, there is hardly a parent, carer, or spouse who is not suffering from back pain, shoulder pain, sciatic nerve pain at some point in time. Now, I know, because I wrecked my back many years ago as a young physio working at Stoke Mandeville in spinal injuries. And in those days, we didn't hoist anybody. I'm quite short, I'm 5'2". Two of us would lift 6-foot guys on and off beds, in and out of wheelchairs. And to be honest, that wrecked my back and it hasn't improved since, although obviously I have to manage that too. But I know that lifting causes problems and too many people are lifting. I accept. If you are in a property that is unsuitable, if you have got to a stage and lockdown is not helping, and I know one very well-known mummy out there who is suffering a lot with back problems because lockdown has caused problems with housing, but we need to try and get the hoists in place from very early. Just because your child is only 2 or 3 and is liftable and easy, do not think that's going to last. You need to get those hoists in place. You need to get all your equipment in place. We have post and perioperative pain. Obviously, operations are not pain-free. But when it comes to hips, we know that many, many hip pain problems come post-spinal surgery. Now, we hope, but we don't know, although I think the evidence is beginning to show that growing rods are preventing some of those later hip pains because they're keeping people straighter for longer. Jackets do help equalize weight bearing, but if you're constantly sitting on one side, you are constantly using just one bum cheek to sit. So ultimately you have just one body that you're sitting on a lot of the time. And spinal surgery comes along and changes that after what could be 4, 5, up to 10 years of sitting in one position. Spinal surgery changes everything so that your whole position of your pelvis is different. Then understandably, you are going to start getting hip pain. Dislocated hips themselves are rarely painful, although we do know there are children with hip pain who have nothing to do with their spinal posture. The biggest problem we have is what we do with these hips, and that's all to come. So these are all topics we will be covering with pain. Okay, let's start with immobility. The most immobile children are the type 1s. Some of the older adults who have become immobile over the years following spinal surgery. I know a lot of adults have told me that in their 30s and 40s they seem to lose some arm function, and being unable to even wiggle yourself around in your wheelchair can cause pain. It's also fatiguing to be stuck in the same position all the time. We know that the usual person will move constantly. When I am teaching doctors and physiotherapists, I ask them to keep still, absolutely still, for the minimum of 10 minutes. And within 2 minutes, they've all wiggled. They've all crossed their legs, uncrossed their legs, slumped to one side. It's very, very difficult to keep still, and yet we expect people in wheelchairs just to be happy keeping still all the time. One of the complaints, yes, at one side I've said as a belt, but that's different. Sometimes the jacket harnesses are on some of the kids, which are very restrictive. Spinal jackets can be quite restrictive, but there is still some mobility. Some of the type 1s are still so weak that they're quite immobile. They need to be moved. It may be cute to see them lying in pea pods or all these other chairs, but we need to move. We know that hydrotherapy, swimming, even just a roll around in the bed, get somebody moving, get a child moving. Do not think that you've done their physio during the day in the wheelchair, they've had their physio. You need to move. And immobility, particularly when hospitalized. Now, if you go into hospital with an infection, chest infection, whatever you go in with, if you have a parent or carer with you, even if the nurses are there, they're, shooing you out the way, make sure you're still doing the passive movements, make sure you're still stretching shoulders, stretching elbows while that child is immobilized, because one of the big issues is often a week in hospital, 10 days in hospital can make things a lot worse. Muscle pain is rare. Actual muscle pain is rare. It happens in some conditions. It's not usual in SMA. Stiffness, cramp, that sort of pain in muscles is not rare. Cramp can happen to anybody. The usual muscle cramp is usually exercise induced, but it can be cold induced. There can be people who get cramp for absolutely no reason. A lot of people suffer from cramp. People talk about drugs for cramp, but if you really are suffering from a lot of cramp, one of the best ways of getting rid of it is massage and movement. Massage is very good for cramp, but if it's still a problem, then the best thing that we can recommend for regular cramps, painful cramps, are what we call intermittent compression therapy. And intermittent compression therapy are the big boots that pump up and down and basically improve your circulation and give you a bit of a massage. Foot spas can help. Anything that gives you a bit of massage and a bit of improvement in circulation. Now somebody's then going to jump in and ask me what I think about vibration plates. I don't have a lot of experience of vibration plates. My concern was that if they were too intense in a child, could they damage growing bones? And the studies in Germany have said no. Now, a lot of the work done on vibration plates are done in cerebral palsy. There is no studies that I can find on vibration plates in SMA. So that if people are really keen, we need to try and get together a study to see exactly what it is doing. What we are told by the endocrinologists is that vibration plates can help improve bone health. But again, we haven't seen a lot of evidence in something like SMA. But what's important with the vibration plates is it can't cause damage and it may well help with cramp. Joint stiffness, one of my absolute favorite topics. Contractures, If you have a contracture, by itself it is not painful. What makes that contracture painful is when somebody comes along and tries to stretch it or splint it. But you can get pain when you are going through a growth spurt. Now, obviously, adults, you stopped growing through your growth spurt. Girls around 14, 15, boys around 17, 18, you stop growing. But if you imagine you've got a tight muscle, but your bone is still growing, you are going to have problems because the muscle won't stretch as the bone grows. And all that will happen is you can get pain in your muscles from that sort of stretch in a quick growth spurt. So that often happens around teenage. And the other thing is that you will get growth spurts. That's our dog, sorry, it's getting very excited about something. That when you have a growth spurt, you will get some problems with increasing contracture and pain because the muscles won't stretch. Now, some children may get growing pains. Growing pains, interestingly, do exist. I know some doctors will poo-poo the idea of growing pains, but I worked, before I did muscles, I did rheumatology, and I worked with a very eminent rheumatologist who explained growing pains as exactly that. It's when your bones grow faster than your muscles and everything has to stretch, which is why children who cry with growing pains say it's their muscles that are hurting, because their muscles are trying to stretch to keep up with their bones. Why does it happen at night in bed? Because apparently your bones grow at night in bed. Don't ask me why. I don't know if they know that it's nighttime, but apparently bones grow faster at night. Now, the other issue about pain and contractures is positioning. So obviously, if when you're lying in bed, your hip flexion contractures or your knee flexion contractures cause problems, then yes, you are going to have a problem of pain with positioning because it becomes uncomfortable at night in bed. And there are people who need turning several times at night in bed because they get uncomfortable very quickly, excuse me. Now, there are sleep systems. The biggest problem with sleep systems is you may be comfortable for a little while, but then if you need turning, your whole sleep system needs turning as well. So my feeling about sleep systems is the less complicated the sleep system, the better it is for everybody because it takes less moving around. So the least complicated piece of equipment obviously are pillows, but there are also things called T-rolls, E-rolls. There are companies that make these things that just keep your legs in a straight line and stop them flopping out. You can put your legs over rolls. And the company I know best who do this thing are Matchet Supports, M-A-T-C-H-E-T-T, Matchet Supports. Go and have a look. You may, in lockdown, be able to make something. I know my front room, you can't see it. I have a sewing machine. This is like, my table is like a mask factory. I've been making masks. So I have lots of little face masks around that I'm making out of an old book of curtain fabric. So that's what I've been up to. So pain, we need to think about. The next one is the spinal deformity. Now, not everybody gets growing rods. Not everybody gets spinal jackets. Those who get spinal jackets may not want to wear them. Not every company who makes spinal jackets make good ones. We have people in Lycra. I have not seen any proof for Lycra in SMA 1 or 2. And my only positives with Lycra are in some type 3s who have very bendy hips. Occasionally in type 2s, the Lycra shorts, but I do not believe that Lycra can work against a growing spine. And although I do know there are children wearing them, I am not averse to them, but I think we need to think about how long they're wearing them and whether that's their only spinal support, whether they have good seating systems. And good seating systems can be a very, very good alternative to spinal jackets. And if you're wondering what I'm looking at, it's because I've got all this pain stuff on a presentation I've done before. So we know joint deformity, but the question then is which joints? And the most painful joints, again, are usually hips, occasionally knees. It depends what you're doing. If you are a person who wants to stand and you have tight hips and knees, then yes, it's going to be painful. It's very difficult to keep somebody straight forever. And while there are a few young people out there that I know, and when I say young people, I know there's some 30-plus-year-olds who I've known from long, long time, who actually were generally quite bendy children, who had parents who religiously used to stretch them, whether that worked or not for some. But there are a few people, young people out there who have very few contractures, but they are few. They are few. But the most painful contractures generally are the hips and knees. Back pain in children. Do children get back pain? Yes, children do get back pain, but actually the mechanical back pain that adults get is rare in SMA. That pain that you will get, the sciatic nerve pain, the joint pain that you will get, the sacral pain, is very rare in children. The sort of back pain that most children will get is the pain they get from trying to stand. And if we can go back to these hips, what happens is we have tight hips pulling our pelvis forward. Oh, I think I've got my head on back to front. That might be why we can't go that way. I think everything's on back to front. Okay, so hips are pulling forward. Hips are bent. The only way we can come up is by coming up that way. That gives us this extra curve in our spine backwards. This is called a lordosis. So we've got this big curve here. We're trying to stand up, but our hips are bent, and this lordosis is what tends to cause the back pain. So it's mostly standing that causes back pain. Some children and adults, but mostly children that I know of, are very prone to fractures. Interestingly, unlike the fractures you get with people who take steroids, like the muscular dystrophy boys, most of the fractures you will see in SMA are long bone fractures. It is rare to get spinal fractures unless you are very, very fragile and somehow fall out of your wheelchair, get something fallen on you, or have good old-fashioned vigorous physiotherapy that can ultimately break a rib. But the most common fractures are long bone fractures. But so that back pain will not usually come from vertebral collapse or vertebral fractures. So back pain will not usually be from bone density issues in the spine, even though the spine may be thin, and we know that because some children are not suitable for spinal surgery until they can increase their bone density in their spine, but their spines do not collapse. You don't get that crushing of the bones through weakness in the vertebra. That is extremely rare. So that's a positive up to a point. But that is what is happening in the back. It's the back to the tight hip joints. If you've got a young SMA at home, please start stretching their hips straight away. And what causes back pain in parents, carers, spouses? We know what causes back pain. Poor lifting techniques or any lifting. Now, one of the things that most mums and carers will do is stick the child on their hip when they're carrying them. And children have this monkey style way of holding on with their legs. In an SMA, you can't do that. So you plonk the child on the hip and they're not holding on. You are taking the whole weight of the child. In an SMA1 child who has poor head control, you've got to get hold of the head as well as body. Now that is fine for a small child. You're talking 3, 4 years old. It is much harder. I have seen some horrific lifting. I have complained. Every parent I see will know that I will happily beat them up about the way they lift. Oh, it's what I'm used to. But actually, it's causing long-term problems. Back pain is a pain. And it's not only that it's causing pain or strain now, you are damaging your spine, which will then lead to more problems of sciatica and more long-term back problems into the future. Now, the other thing that you have to think of is that this then impacts on your hips. And I'm talking about parents and carers here. The back problems, the nerve problems will impact on your hips and all the way down. So if you don't start looking after your backs, you will end up with chronic back pain. You will end up with possible sliding of your vertebrae on top of each other, which causes nerve pain and often can cause sciatic nerve pain. Bad lifting can cause herniated discs. We know about acute slip discs, but I'm not talking about the acute pain, because if you slip a disc, you will probably start looking after your back. It's not a nice way to be told you need to start looking after your back. It's extremely painful and can cause even bladder and bowel problems in certain cases. But it's the long-term damage that you need to look out for. And there are what we call killer lifts. It is lift and twist. So it's when you lift a child and then twist your own back and lean over with a twisted spine. Or you pick them up with a twisted spine, lift and twist motions. Unfortunately, number one, in and out of the wheelchair. So rarely do you pick them up straight and not lift them onto something where you're twisting your spine. A terrible lift and twist is in and out of the bath. If you do not have bath seats or booster seats that come up out of the bath, or mechanical lifts for the bath, or a hoist, then you need to get one, because it is really a bad lift. When you have a wet child, you lift them up, you're bent over the bath, you lift them up and you have to twist. You have no choice but to twist to get them out of the bath. And then the last killer lift, as most parents will know, is in and out of a car seat. Now, I know that the car seats that rotate so that they're facing forward are ridiculously expensive, but you need to be careful with car seats that you have good access to them, that the seat in front is well in front, and you can actually do that without lifting and twisting to fasten them into that seat. So please think when you're doing those 3 lifts, that if you can avoid them, if you can make sure you're doing them with the least possible twist in your spine, if you can make sure your vehicle is as accessible as possible, then you will be doing yourself a long-term favor. The other thing, of course, is carrying heavy children, carrying children up and down stairs is really not a sensible option. We have had children dropped downstairs. We have had children and parents who've fallen forwards on the stairs when going up the stairs. When it comes to lifting and pain, the other thing you need to be aware of is stair lifts. Do not get a stair lift if you can help it, because you have to be lifted on at the bottom and lifted off at the top. Please avoid stair lifts. But back pain is a big problem. So the other problems for parents, carers and spouses, apart from poor posture, repetitive strain. We can get wrist problems from constantly lifting. We can get problems of lack of exercise, poor muscles. I know a lot of parents have taken up exercise in lockdown, and a lot of parents are actually doing the morning workout with or they're doing Zoom classes online. It's all very well, but you need to build up that trunk and core and injuries. Now, as I say, pressure sores are rare. The major place to get pressure sores is from badly fitting splints and orthoses. So badly fitting jacket, badly fitting foot splints. And then the other place is the nose sores that you can get from masks and BiPAP, but they are manageable. None of these should cause any long-term problems. If you are getting pressure from a splint, do not pad the pressure. Do not pad the place where you are getting the pressure. Now, let's take out one area of pressure, and that is knee pressure in CAFOs. When you are standing in knee, ankle, foot orthoses, there will be some pressure around the knee. It should not be directly on the kneecap. It should be below the kneecap, holding the top of the knee just below the kneecap. So if the kneecap is here over the joint, the support for the knee should be here. But if you are getting a lot of kneecap pressure, that will be painful. But the main thing is, if that is painful, then your whole CAFO needs bending slightly to take some of that pressure off. But the big area are ankles, is one of the biggest areas for night splints, and CAFOs is around the ankles. If you have red marks, do not pad over the red mark, pad around it and take the pressure off. The other place that you will get pressure is jackets, particularly if you have a spinal twist. You need to make sure that jacket fits properly. You should not be getting red marks. And if you're getting red marks and they're causing pain constantly, then you need changing. Red marks by themselves that are not painful or disappear within 20 minutes need to be there because they are supporting something. The pain you get with operations will be controlled by the doctors at the time of the operation. So if you're having foot surgery, gastrostomy, spinal surgery, there will be pain medication around the time of the operation. So peri and post-operative pain is manageable. It will happen. It's like injections. There's no point saying that they don't hurt, but they don't hurt for long, or they can be managed. It's when that pain keeps going and going and going that we need to look at what's going on. And when you are having an operation, you need, one of the questions that parents, carers, or adults need to ask is, how long should I expect this pain to continue? Before you are discharged, if you are still in pain, please make sure you ask, how long should I expect this pain to continue? Because you need to know when that pain stops being normal and needs to be investigated or needs more help. So that's one of the questions you should be asking for any surgery. How long should this hurt? Adequate pain relief is another issue. Some people will take absolutely everything they're given, and some people never want to take even one paracetamol. Your pain relief has to depend on what you want and what your doctors will prescribe. And it's not quite as simple as to say you do or you don't take ibuprofen. Some people can't take ibuprofen. Some people will find it doesn't work for them. Some people prefer paracetamol, some don't. So pain relief really needs to be sorted with your doctor. It's no good saying one size fits all. It doesn't. Different people respond differently to different pain relief. Fractures, falls, and injuries we've talked about. Direct blows are rare but can happen. I have more than once heard of siblings in wheelchairs who've managed to crash into each other. That is the most common way of a direct blow. We have had quite a few type 3s who've broken legs falling over. We need to be careful. being type 3 does not make you immune to fractures. On the other hand, any ambulant child can have a fracture at some point. So you do need to be careful about fractures. Parents, you need to be careful about being run over or hit by a wheelchair. It's not impossible. There is one other type of fracture that is possible. It's really only common in people with low bone density, and that is something called microfractures. And microfractures usually happen around joint surfaces. The most common site of microfractures is around the knee. They can be incredibly difficult to see on X-ray. They will not be obvious apart from feeling like deep bone pain in the joint. And basically what happens is, in low bone density, if you've got pressure on a knee, and it's most often when you're being moved, then you may have microfractures. And there is no real treatment for them apart from immobilizing. Now, we have had one little girl who had microfractures around the knee, and we did find that serial casting her knee really did help her knee pain quite substantially. But not everybody can have serial casting. You can't spend your life with your knee stuck out straight. Sometimes it doesn't work. We were quite lucky that we could accommodate her in her current wheelchair during a school holiday. But immobilizing can help with microfractures. So if there's pain from microfractures, you can be cast for them. Fatigue is a big problem in SMA, and a lot of people I speak to, who particularly type 3s, who find that fatigue actually can get quite painful, that it's exhausting, and that causes a level of pain. It may not be an excruciating pain, but it is a level of pain that's hard to cope with. And we need to manage fatigue, and that is done with children through pacing. And not all small children, particularly the 3s, can pace themselves. And I can think of one in particular who goes more than a little berserk at times and suffers for it. And it really is true that you do need, if the child cannot pace themselves, they get too excitable, they're rushing around with brothers and sisters, then teachers must be taught to pace them. They must be paced in school, in a school playground. Often some of the better type 3s do not get an EHCP or a care plan or an assistant at school, so they do need to be managed. And there are a lot of ways of managing that. We have had children whose schools have built special playgrounds for them, and they take a couple of friends in, or their class goes into a smaller playground where there's less rushing around space. So fatigue needs to be managed at all levels because it can cause a problem. Okay, bad physio is a cause of pain, overstretching joints, and this can be anybody. We've met more than one child in our time who will not let anybody near them because they've been overstretched. This is particularly true of ankles, but it can be knees as well. It's a big problem, and this is why one of the other reasons that we specifically ask for active assisted exercise, that the child is helping when you're doing stretches, is because it reduces the possibility of injury. And because we know ankles are such a bad site for being overstretched, this is so important that we go slowly, slowly, gently, gently, and you learn to feel as a parent or a carer just how much movement you can get from the muscle. If it feels you're stopped, stop. If the child says stop, you stop. You may not stop holding it, but you would stop stretching it. You may hold it for a good half a minute, and you may then get relaxations and better movement, but do not push against a child who's saying stop, because that's when injuries often happen. Everything has to be done slowly. Stretches need to be done slowly, because then you are less likely to get to that point and go past it by accident. Okay, we've talked about taping and how it can help with pain, and it very definitely can help with mechanical pain, but that's a whole nother thing. Marnie, is it question time?
Yeah, we've had a few sent
Yes,
in.
please, because we've just about got to the end of pain, I think.
Okay. Do bad hips stop leg straightening?
Yes, basically. You can have bent knees that will cause bent hips, and that's a strange thing to say, but if you imagine that you're lying down and your knees won't go straight, then you can see automatically it bends your hip. So that having bent knees, even if there's nothing wrong with your hip, having stuck knees can cause tight hips. It's very hard. Nobody can say that they didn't try or that it's somebody's fault. If you are sitting down all day, you have weak muscles, you are going to see tightness in your hips. You can stretch, you can position, you can stand. There are many things you can do. But we have several children who have beautifully strong hips and kick right up in the air. We've got several type 1s who can do amazing things with their legs up in that position. But the problem is can't actually get them down. They've got nice strong knees, but actually what then happens is when you try and get down past about there, then we get that arch in the back, and we end up with that sort of posture where we're lying with knees up, back arched, and it's all uncomfortable. So bent hips by themselves may not cause pain, although they can, but they can have a knock-on effect on positioning on the back, on the knees, and the knees can have a knock-on effect on the hips. Does that sort of answer the question?
I guess so. Yeah. Another question is, pins and needles when standing, CAFOs fit fine. My daughter is 4. Why is this?
Pins and needles are a form of numbness. Basically, the CAFOs may fit fine, but there may be tightness somewhere else. Pins and needles, as anybody knows, can occur when you put a joint in such a tight position that when you then relax it, there's a sudden rush of nerve impulses. So what tends to happen, if you imagine you're kneeling with your bottom down on your feet, so that basically the impulses get stuck at your knees and can't get through. When you straighten up, you get this sudden rush of nerve impulses that are coming down to your feet, firing off and going berserk. Why do they happen in CAFOs? Now, it's often the case of the CAFOs may fit well, but maybe they've got tight hips or knees in there that are somehow blocking, or when they're put into the CAFOs, their feet are in such a position, when you're lying, when you're sitting, when you've got your knee bent, your foot is in a much more relaxed position than when you've got your knees straight. When you've got your knees straight, very often the toes want to point down. So what you are doing is when you are standing, the CAFOs may fit beautifully, but you are pushing the knee straight and the ankle straight, and the leg's not used to that. It's more used to this sort of more relaxed position with the foot hanging down. It does it at night in bed. As soon as you bend your knee, your foot will relax. So what you are doing is you're straightening the hip, you are straightening the knee, you are straightening the foot, and nothing can get through completely. It may be that if the pins and needles become too much of a problem, you need to take some of the stretch off. You may need a tiny bend in the knee or a tiny bit of support under the heel of the foot to take some of the stretch off. The body is being pushed into a position of upright that it's not used to for X hours a day, half an hour, an hour. It's usually bent, which is more relaxed, and therefore that is causing the pins and needles. It may be, if it's really severe, that you need a little bit of bend in the knee of the CAFOs.
Okay, great. Another one is, Would Great Ormond Street do supporting letters for inadequate housing?
We can, and we often do letters of support. All right. One of the things that you need to always put, and what we put in letters, when somebody is having to lift a child, having to carry them up and down stairs, that parent and child are at severe risk of injury. Once the council know that, the ball is in their court. You have made it explicit that you are. So if you are writing this yourself, that you have made it known that you and your child are at serious risk of injury by being in that property, having to do the lifting and the carrying. So that's the first aspect of any letter. Serious risk of injury. The council know. If something happens, the council were aware, and you need to make sure that letter arrives. The second thing is access. People with disabilities have a right to access their environment the same as their peers, the same as their siblings, the same as anyone else. If you cannot access your home, you are in a way being discriminated against because you do not have full access to maybe the upstairs, you can't get your wheelchair in the kitchen, you can't get into the garden. So there is an issue of access. And the third thing is the ability to perform, to function, to live as their peers do, so that a child needs to be able to explore their environment. A child needs to be able to develop, so that they need suitable housing, and you need to be safe when you are in that house. Great Ormond Street, we do. Your social worker can write, MDUK, your care advisor, your family care officer, whatever they're known as, they are very good people to help with writing. SMA UK, I think, will write in support of people. So yes, there are plenty of people out there who will support you, but if the council haven't got the property, if they have 20 people that they all say a priority, it's really difficult for us to push the council. We can do the best that we can.
Another one is leaning on one bum cheek is causing discomfort. How do I get a good seating position?
Okay, the first thing is you need a decent OT and an OT that understands the problem. There are two possibilities when you're sitting on one bum cheek. The first is to try and get you, depending on how old you is, to sit more symmetrically. That doesn't always work. If you're spending your whole life sitting on one bum cheek, or however long your life is, you could be 4 years old, you could be 24 years old, you could be 54 years old. If you've always sat on one bum cheek, that feels straight to you. It may not be comfortable, but it's straight. You try moving and you feel as though you're falling to the opposite side. And this is a big problem. So that what happens is, and let's bring Dolly back here, you're sitting on one bum cheek. So you're sitting, say, on this bum cheek. Now you have two possibilities. You either push the child over so that you're sitting more equally, but that rarely works, or you support the bum cheek that is not taking weight. And that is the best way for long-term stiffness. So if I was to push somebody over onto both bum cheeks and they felt that they were falling, that's not going to help, because it alters your neck position, it alters the way you lean on your arms. It can be done. It can be done with thoracic supports, it can be done with spinal jackets. There are ways of doing it. But you need an OT that understands that it's one of two problems. Either you support under the gap, and that's probably the best way of doing it. So I write, and I'm not taking away your problem cheek. I could push on the right and make the right higher and push you over, but you need to see it in context of what you're used to. There's no good pushing me if my head's then suddenly going to go the other way because I'm trying to counterbalance because I feel as though I'm being pushed to the side. You need, I have a problem up to a point with private companies selling wheelchair cushions, because I'm not convinced that they all know how to manage them. Now, J is a very good seating system if you get the right J cushion. But all of you out there who are sitting on J seating systems, J will say that cushion should be evaluated every single year. And I bet there are many of you sitting on J cushions who've had them 2 or more years and nobody's ever taken the covers off. They haven't checked the gel pads. You may have changed posture and not be right. I've seen burst gel pads. I've seen inappropriate gel pads and no gel pads. So that you really need to find yourself an OT or a wheelchair service who will really assess you properly to make sure you're sitting in the best possible position from both comfort and function. So it's got to be comfortable, it's got to be functional, and it's got to be in the best position possible for your spine, your head, and your pelvis. Okay?
Another one is, my daughter's spine is fully flexible, but once sitting without her jacket, it is curved. The jacket is worn roughly 7 hours a day, give or take. What are good positions to help the spine without the jacket?
Okay, now the first thing is, when are those 7 hours a day? What we have found very often is they're put on in the morning, the child wears it all day, and admittedly it's lockdown, so there isn't school, but you know, evening time, you've done your 7 hours, you got up at 7 o'clock in the morning, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after the end of school, off comes the jacket. Now, we would say that's completely the wrong way around. That the children who wear their jacket 7 or 8 hours a day should do it at the second half of the day, when you're up in the morning, when you're bright, you're active, you're not tired, you're not fatigued. Get moving, get active. That's when your jacket should be up, and your 7 hours should be the last. When you are out of the jacket and you are slopping around, that is fine if you're curved, but you should be changing your position regularly. You should be off the floor. If this is a small child, one of the worst positions is actually on the floor, because what you will get is that, firstly, when you are sitting on the floor, you tend to have much more of this curved, what we call kyphotic posture for balance. You tend to slop your legs out. You tend to lean to one side to use hands with the other. If you are sitting out of your jacket, ideally you are sitting in something that's going to hold you quite nicely, sitting on a level seat, sitting somewhere where maybe if you are sitting on a settee, that you have a lap tray that keeps your legs symmetrical. You need to think about the posture all the way up and down. The other thing is moving. Don't allow anybody, child or adult, infant or teenager, to be slopped to one side on a settee, in an easy chair, on the floor for long periods. You're Xboxing, if you're Xboxing straight, that's fine, but if you're Xboxing leaning to one side, if you need to move, you need to be as straight as possible. Next question.
One of my son's legs are longer than the other. His hips are extremely tight. Is this why?
It is possible to have legs of different lengths, but asymmetrical contractures will make them look different. It's also possible to look different if one is dislocated and the other one isn't, if one is subluxed and one isn't, if one's dislocated and one's subluxed. So that is often a problem, where hips may look different where they are differently in the joint. But asymmetrical contractures can be a problem and make them look, so if you're tighter in one hip, it'll make that leg look shorter. Knee contractures can do the same sort of thing, yes, but it's perfectly possible. It's not impossible to have different leg lengths, but it's usually in SMA, it's from different hip joints as well as the different tightness.
Okay. Another one is, when I stretch my 10-year-old son, his hips are making a popping noise. Is this dangerous?
Not if he's not complaining about it. The popping noise can be one of several things. Sometimes it's joint noise, sometimes it's a tendon rubbing over a bone, sometimes it's the same as when you click your fingers, if you've got that horrible habit of clicking your fingers. If he is not bothered about it, it is not dangerous. No popping has ever made a big problem. If it's clunking, that's a different matter. If when you stretch them you're hearing a clunk, that is a joint that is subluxing. In other words, the hip bone is moving in and out of the joint, but that is usually painful, and that is something that you think, ugh, that doesn't sound right, and then you probably wouldn't be doing it. But the popping noise, no. If he's not bothered by about it, it's not a problem.
What are the most natural ways to manage pain?
Well, natural depends what you mean by natural, but if we're saying not drug, massage helps depending on what the pain is. Taping can help if you reckon that that's joint injury, joint pain. Taping can help because that supports the joint. Massage can help by improving the circulation. So if the pain is caused by problems with circulation, massage or foot spas and things can help that. You can use hot and cold. Some people prefer hot for pain, a hot water bottle. You need to make sure we don't get burns. You can use the microwave ones, but you really do need to be aware of burns. It's not because you have sensory issues. It's just because if you're immobile and you can't move that hot water bottle, you can end up with burns, but that can help. Immobility can sometimes help if movement causes the pain, such as I was saying with the microfractures, the knee microfractures. Sometimes immobilizing them in plaster for a week can help the pain. You can use cold, as I say, icing. Some people prefer ice, which numbs the pain. When you have pain caused by swelling, and I'm not talking about swelling as you see in a lot of ankles caused by circulatory problems, but if you have a swollen joint from an injury, particularly ankles, there is something called contrast baths, which really works well. And that is quite hot water, ice cold water, 2 minutes in each. Now, it's not burning hot water, it's hot. It's not freezing so that it's painful, it's very cold. 2 minutes in each. Now, small children will not cope with contrast baths, but an older child, a teenager, even an adult, it's a really lovely way of reducing swelling following an injury. But then you really need to elevate and exercise if you can exercise. And that's another good reason for taping, because if you hold the joint in the proper way, you should still be able to get a little bit of pain-free movement. Okay.
What are your views on hip surgery?
I don't know. We, unfortunately, thanks to lockdown, have had to cancel the hips workshop we were planning in June. And a surprising number of orthopedic surgeons and neuromuscular consultants, neuromuscular physios, were all going to get together and discuss what we're doing with hips. Now, this is particularly in type 1s who are getting quite severe hip flexion contractures because they're getting very strong in the muscles. As I say, we've got at least 2 children who will happily lie with their legs up in the air here, but can't get them down. That's one problem. And then the other problem are the good type 2s who may well go on to walk with these new treatments, who have dislocated or tight hips that may prevent them, or the type 3s who've lost ambulation within the year. That's England, it may be in Scotland or other places, that we need to think of hip flexor surgery or hip surgery to get type 3s back on their feet. We know in England that one of the problems that we have is if you have lost ambulation in the year and you are suitable for nusinersen, you have to get back on your feet within a year. Now, if the hip flexion contractures are preventing that, then we have to think of hip surgery. I am very open on a one-to-one basis, but we have to think surgery is not a cure. It may help keep the hips in, if we have dislocated hips. But if it's hip flexion contractures, it will not cure them. It will lengthen them, but the basic underlying problem of the hip flexor muscles being stronger is still there. By releasing hip flexor muscles, the muscles here, and getting the leg straight, that muscle, you're not going to just chop it off or take it out. That muscle is still there. Even if it regrows or is lengthened, it's still going to be stronger than the muscle that gets the leg backwards. So we have to think, if we're doing that surgery, how are we going to maintain those results? We know in neuromuscular disease, hip surgery rarely lasts more than 6 months to a year. If you're sitting down all day, if you're not using the muscles at the back, if they're too weak to use, hip surgery is fine, but it doesn't last just for muscle tightness. Now, one of the things about hip dislocation is we don't have enough information in SMA, because up until very recently in standards, the second standards of care still said, and they were published in 2017, still said, do not do hip surgery. They will fall out again. Now, this was before all the new treatments. But we don't know, because one of the issues about putting hips back is, can we make them so stiff that they don't move? And this is a danger. So we need to get together with those orthopedic surgeons, with the physios, with the neuromuscular doctors, and get this sorted. But I am not against surgery. What I am worried about is how long it'll last and how we manage after it's done. We can't just do it, send the child, send the adult home and say, okay, fine, your surgery, go. It's not quite that simple.
Okay. Final question is, I suffer with sciatica, but because of SMA, cannot do the typical stretches used to treat it. Is there anything else I can do?
Now that's the stretches are not the only answer for sciatica. There's many treatments for sciatica that physios can do. The first question would be, is have you had spinal surgery? Because one of the biggest problems we would have is that if you have had spinal surgery into your sacrum, so that you have no pelvic movement and no real mobility, then it's much harder to treat. On the other hand, if you've had spinal surgery, sciatica is usually not the biggest problem. So I just need a little bit more information about whether you've had spinal surgery. Does it go all the way down into pelvis? When does it happen? If you want to send an email to Lucy, I could answer that better with more information. So you can email Lucy. Lucy will pass the email on. So it's Lucy@TreatSMA. Lucy will pass that email on to me, and then I'll be able to answer that question better.
Okay, great.
So is that all the questions for now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was asked also to talk about hips and spines, and we have got onto hips. And one of the big problems is, if you have hip flexion contractures, there's no sudden magic. There is no drug that's suddenly going to make them better. What we have to think about with hips is how functionally they're getting in the way. What can we do about it? What will those drugs do? Will it make them worse? Will it make them better? Generally, what we are seeing is that the drugs that are being used, certainly for the type 2s, what we have seen so far is that the hips can get tighter. And that is back to where we were with these muscles getting stronger at the expense of the weaker muscles. So that we need to be aware. We have already seen, even after 4 or 5 injections, some of the children are starting to get hip tightness again or more. And what we need to think about is how much standing we're doing, how much positioning we're doing, how much can we stretch, how much can we position them in bed, in whatever position, to try and prevent the increase in tightness of the hips. Now, one of the problems that we're also finding is that people generally, and when I say people, I'm probably talking about physios generally, are not taking this seriously enough. The assessment that we're doing, and I know that people are talking about the assessments that are done. The assessments that we're doing for the MAA, for the Managed Access Agreement, for NICE, are just talking about mild, moderate, severe hips. It's not really measuring hips. Now, I am a pain in the butt about measuring. I must be measured regularly. Now, shout at me, type 1 parent. Do need to be more specific than mild, moderate, severe hip flexion contractures, knee contractures, ankle contractures, because we need to manage this. And as physios and parents and carers, we need to get to grips with what make the hips tighter. Fine if it doesn't interfere with function. But then we've got to start accepting that this is one of the downsides, but there are so many more positives. So we really need to think about how we manage these hips. Is surgery an option? Is surgery an answer? Is it going to last? Can we just be a little bit blasé and say, well, no matter, there's surgery? It's not that simple. We do not want to put children through surgery. It's not, parents don't want to put them through surgery. I, as a physio, do not want to have to put a child through surgery. And I think in a year's time, well, we're going to be back where we started. I am not a big fan. Now, I know there are parents out there, and we have discussed surgery, but I know also that we have to think about positioning, seating, standing, tilt tables, whatever, to make sure that surgery lasts, to make sure that when those hips are released, that we exercise the opposite muscles as much as possible, that we get them into water, we get them swimming, we get them doing all sorts of things that will try and build up the weaker muscles to help prevent those hips get tighter again. It is a total package. This is not just about hips, this is about everything that's going on. Now with spines, it's the same sort of thing. I do not think that from what we've seen, the new treatments are having the same effect on the spine. Spines, we know, will deteriorate in SMA, new treatments or not, because spines change with growth. And that is as simple as that. In 31 years, I have never met a child with SMA2 who did not have a spinal curvature. And we're talking into the thousands. Children with SMA2 get curvature of the spine. Young type 3s who lose ambulation get curvature of the spine. Most of our type 1s either have kyphosis forwards or some curvature of the spine. It is one of the problems of SMA. It's not going to go away with these new treatments unless we are talking of the pre-symptomatics who don't get the problems. I have had children who've stood 13, 14, 15 years old and have still developed spinal curve. I have had type 3s who have walked and still developed spinal curves when they've walked. So spines, hips are one of the inevitable problems of SMA. We're not going to magically make them go away, but we can minimize the effect. Back pain is much more a problem in adults. With SMA, I know a lot of people get very stiff. One of the big problems that we have with backs is how difficult it is to build up core muscles in SMA. And yet it's not impossible, because what we have to think about is this static work. And this is where Pilates style exercises often come in. Because if you have had spinal surgery and you can't move your pelvis, it is very difficult to exercise your tummy muscles, but it's not impossible. And what we need to look at is how we do that in terms of getting that core working and getting the front of the spine, the trunk, toned up a little bit. You can do it, some of the exercises inside lying. You can try one of the best exercises are singing exercises, because what you learn to do is pull your tummy in and still talk. And I am sitting here now having done singing lessons in a mega million years ago, whereby you tighten your tummy muscles but you keep breathing, because the normal thing to do is to breathe in and hold your tummy in while you breathed in, and then you need to breathe out again, and that's not the way to do it. So there are tummy muscle exercises you can do, there are relaxation exercises, there are little movements that you can try with your ribs if you're not that fixed. So there are things that you can do. You probably need the help of a physio. I know many of the adults do not get a lot of physio, but possibly if you have your neuromuscular assessment, your annual neuromuscular assessment, again, we're talking about the UK there, that you ask your physio at your neuromuscular assessment to give you some help and some exercises. That's what they're there for. Marnie, any more questions?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, I'm not sure that we've got anything more to chat about tonight. We were looking at hips and spines, which we've talked about in the context of pain and tightness. We've talked about spine stretches in the past. We need some topics for next time. I am very happy to take what people suggest. Otherwise, I will be looking at doing some Pilates style exercises, looking at static exercise work, looking at how breathing exercises can work with your trunk and your core as well. And we will see what we can do with working that trunk and core for children and for adults. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Have a good unlockdown if you're coming out of lockdown. Have a good lockdown if you're still staying in lockdown, and don't forget to do those exercises while you're in there. And that's parents and spouses and everybody else too. Okay, see you next time.
Well, thank you, Marion. It's been great as always. If
Thank you, Marnie.
Any topics they think they'd like Marion to cover, please just drop TreatSMA a message and we will discuss this with Marion and see what we can do.
Okay, see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.